Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. As the snow has hit here in the UK and I'm housebound, I figured it'd be a good time to fill you in on some of the reports that are coming to me from comments that are made on the podcast or on YouTube or on the articles that I release on the website. I wanted to bring them to you because they're just as important as the cases that I work. And in a couple of them, I will go on to work that case. Some of them I have to sit down with the witnesses and chat with them online, so I've got all of the details. But I think you'll enjoy it. Today's episode is called An 8-foot hair-covered hybrid beast, the Gibbet dogs, and curdling Wales. Now, Wales as in sounds, not as in Wales the place, but our first story does come from Wales. Now, as we get closer to Yule, many of our traditions come to the fore, and we celebrate this magical season, and we've done this since time began. Some traditions, like the Yule log or adorning the Christmas tree and the Great Feast, have followed us into the modern age. Each country in the UK has its own customs, and yet we know very little into the reason behind them. Long before any modern religion was introduced, we celebrated this time of year on the winter solstice. There would be food preserved in the plentiful times of summer and harvest that would last us into the spring months. We would sit around the fire and tell stories, old and new. We would pass on our oral history, tales told by our ancestors. In Wales, there's a tradition of the Lwyd, a creature half human and half mare. This tale was told to many small children, and I would imagine they felt abject terror at the idea of a half-human female with blazing eyes that was also part mare, and she would search the land looking for prey. Now, the story's told even in modern times, and I was contacted by a young man in his 30s who had a story that he shared with me that features some young men who went out in search of the Murray and who said lived in the shack on the top of the mountain. Tom said, "I've been meaning to email you for a while now, Deb, with a story from Cwm, where I grew up. After a recent conversation with one of my friends, he shared with me a tale of a horrible creature he saw with another of our friends when he went in search of the Lwyd." Tom, who comes from a small village in Wales, explained that Lwyd was said to live in a shack at the very top of the mountain. In his words, Tom said, "I've been meaning to email you for a while now with a story from Cwm, where I grew up. After a recent conversation with one of my friends, he shared with me a tale of a horrible creature he saw with another of our friends when he went in search of the Lwyd hybrid woman. So I thought I'd share it with you. When we were chatting, he said he hadn't shared it outside of our friends group before. Basically, a long time ago, there was a half-woman, half-horse lady named Lwyd, and it was said that she used to live in a tin shack that was up on the mountainside. Anyway, everybody for years and years was too afraid to go out there and check it out. The tale goes back generations. We all knew about it. One afternoon, my mate Corey and his friend Dylan were riding their bikes in the village, and they were talking about the legend and how everyone was a chicken, for not going up there and checking it out. So with some bravado, they swore to each other that they would go up and risk it. So after some hesitation, they both proceeded to pedal up towards a spot where it was said that the Lwyd shack was. After they climbed what felt like forever, it's a massive hill, they reached the old shack, and upon entering, they were shocked to see that it was just a derelict old building. There was nothing in there, absolutely nothing, and certainly nothing to be scared of. But that only lasted until they left the shack. After some clowning around and laughing at each other for being scared, they said to each other, "See, nothing to worry about. Everyone's scared for nothing," and we proved them wrong. So they said, "Come on, let's go back down." But as they left the shed, they picked up their bikes and started to ride down the hill back towards Cwm, which means valley in Wales. Everything was fine. Things were going well. And as they were descending the hill, They both slammed on their brakes and came to a dead stop, because in front of them, crossing the gravel track, was what my friend described as an 8-foot, hair-covered hybrid beast. This thing was extremely large in stature and terrifying to the core. It stopped on the track, looked right at them, and before it proceeded to do anything else, they looked at each other, dropped their bikes to the ground, and ran down the grass embankment as fast as they could. They even left the bikes there, never went back up to get them. My mate said that it was the most frightening thing he'd ever experienced, and he's never told anybody until he told me the other week. I'm happy for you to share this, Deb, and it's okay to use our names. I spoke yesterday to a young boy who said he used to sneak off up behind the forest for a smoke, so his mum didn't know. But one day when he was there, he heard a female voice that sounded like it came from the pine woods, and it was whispering his name. He heard her call out, "Logan," and then it happened near the same spot where the other sighting was that Corey and Dylan saw. And there is a lot of holly bushes up around there, Deb, and I know that cynocephaly have something in common with holly for some reason. I know Tom mentioned holly because of its connection to the ancient ones. The satyrs, woodwoos and little folk used holly as protection, amongst other things. Areas where we find holly seem to have different energy to them, and almost supernatural activity is more prevalent there, and perhaps these beings tap into that energy. Another thing Tom mentioned was his home valley, which has been heavily mined over the ages. Cwm is a small mining village in Gwent, so we know that the ground's been disturbed. There's also a cemetery, so it comes as no surprise to me that the wolf-headed men, or cynocephaly, have been seen in the area. The Welsh connection to the wolf-headed ones goes back as far as time itself. Along the same mountain range, there is another tale of a haunting female who would cry out her wails across the valley. Shuri Wild, who's been known through history as a female phantom, would cause people to lose their way up on the mountain. She would call out her haunting cries of "whoop, whoop," and beckon to be followed ever further into the woods. If any witnesses did pursue her, she would lead them on a merry chase, often lasting several hours, finally disappearing at the spot the witness first found themselves in. I wonder if the mountain is haunted by more than just one beast. I find it very strange that a phantom would be whooping in a woodland, but I'll leave that for you to decide. It reminds me very much of the glimmer that the Fae would use on people. Distraction. They'd trick and confuse a person for their own ends, leaving many a wary traveller over the mountains disoriented and confused, and in some cases, many days would go by. Eventually, the poor victim would come to somewhere on the mountainside, lacking some or all of his possessions. In the very same mountain range, there is another case, just a clip north of Cwm, where there is another report made by a visitor to the mountainside who also heard awful howling screams. We heard a blood-curdling scream, and this took place in 2016. One of my listeners on YouTube, Rosanna Lord, shared her experience with something unseen in the Welsh mountains several years ago. Listening to one of my weekly podcasts made her reach out and share their story with us. She said, "Oh my God, I've also heard something like a horrible growl in the Brecon beacons, about 7 or 8 years ago. Myself and my partner at the time had walked up the mountain in the evening. We sat in a field and we could see the silhouette of Penyvan. The sky was beautifully clear, as it was summertime, somewhere between September, early October, about 10 p.m. And we decided to stay there for a bit longer while watching the mountain and the sky. We were up there for more than 10 minutes when all of the animals in the distance scarpered at once. The birds, horses, etc. were acting as if they were alerting each other that there was a predator in the area, and they all just bolted. They made a huge noise, and then everything went completely silent. It was in that silence that we heard the growl. It was very throaty, almost blood-curdling, and we ran about 2 miles all the way home. I've lived in Brecon for over 30 years, and I used to live on a farm, so I'm familiar with the countryside sounds of animals, etc. I've never been scared of anything I've heard, even at night. There's usually an explanation for it. But this growl was something different. I trawled through YouTube trying to identify the growl, and I could only find something similar to a large cat, but this was much louder and more intimidating. To this day, I still don't know what that was, and it freaks me out. This happened on the road leading to Cantref, just outside of Brecon, close to the foot of Pen. It was late summer, as I say, Deb, September, October time, because we were only wearing light jumpers, about 10 p.m. at night. Now, just across the valley, there is a story taken by BBI researcher Kat Chad for a young man who had his own experience with the Black Mountains werewolf. He said, "I saw something I cannot explain when I was younger, and here's my story. I was 19, and my then girlfriend and 3 of my pals were camping in the Black Mountains in Wales. We all went to the local pub, had a few drinks, and then we drove back to our campsite. We were staying in a camp that was in the middle of nowhere, and it was surrounded by woods. Myself and my girlfriend had one tent, and my pals had another. And on settling down for the night, I found that I'd left my smokes outside. So because I'm lazy, I made up the tale that someone was outside our tent poking around. So one of my mates got up out of the tent and looked around. And while he was up, I asked him for a smoke. My pals realised this news and they weren't impressed at all. About an hour or so later, my girlfriend woke me up saying, "Someone is outside." So thinking it was one of my pals getting me back, I shouted out, "I know it's one of you." But each one answered from the tent, "Nope, not us." So I grabbed my torch and left the tent. It was pitch black. I heard something as it moved off, making a run for it as the eye left the tent. So I scanned the tree line with my torch, and as the beam went to the left and to the right, it passed a shadowy human-shaped thing, but its eyes reflected like a cat's, but they were red. I shone my torch at it again, and I saw a humanoid figure run through the woods, but it was moving on all fours. I screamed, told my mates and my girlfriend. They thought I was taking the mickey again. I still have this image in my mind, and it was a werewolf. When my torch first hit that creature, it was up on 2 legs. But then, when my torch went back to it, it was down on all fours, running away through the trees. So it would seem that what we have are a number of visitors and locals who are seeing strange creatures, hearing wails, screams, whoops, and blood-curdling howls in an area that's ancient and disturbed, with modern building above and extensive mining below. A mixture of energy that from time to time as humans tap into. Well, the second possibility is that there are living, breathing, upright, human creatures moving along the mountains, traversing the valleys as they go, the same way the deer and the other animals do, as they follow the food sources. But it isn't just Wales that has a tale to tell when it comes to historical events. The next case is called the Horror at Inkpen. It was a horrible manifestation. Now, a man from Utah who is tracing his family lineage came across a strange connection to a possible cryptid report here in the UK. Eddington, Cambridgeshire, is not known in modern times as a place of supernatural significance. In fact, it's a busy town filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life. But many years ago, down the halls of time, there was a strange experience noted by a scholar, and it was shared with me by Steve Hulls, who lives in the US, and he was tracing his ancestors in the UK. Whilst doing so, he came across a written text from the 1800s, scribed by the LDS, that would fit with many of the strange screams and howls and wails and growls that people report hearing in the UK in our modern times. I've known Steve for many years now, and he has an interest in the cryptid subject, so he was excited when he found this historical report. Steve said, I was reading some family history this morning, and we use Family Search, which is a database linked with the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. It's a really good source for families to find their ancestors anywhere on earth. Anyway, from time to time, I seek articles of my ancestors, as I find it fun to learn of them. I found this in one section that I clicked, so I highlighted a portion of it to share. It sounds a lot like a night visit by one of our cryptids in the UK. The scream was described as a yell, a vibration like a thunderclap, topped off with a roar, fading to a moan. And Elijah Gilbert, who's mentioned, is my family relation. Elijah went to the scene to check it out, but was called back. Later, they went past the area to see if there were any signs that any altercation had happened. In the same pattern as many witnesses or investigators of cryptids would do today. Be it Sasquatch or the wolf people, etc., Steve said. Due to the period in history, they, of course, would lay it into the demon catcher, and he's correct. But they'd nothing else in explanation for the event in that area. It was 1873, after midnight, by a river, so it seems they may have irritated a being's night activities, and it told them so. As you know the areas of the UK, Deb, I wonder if any other activity exists in this area now. Have a wonderful weekend, Steve. Steve actually sent me a document that speaks of the incident. It says, an incident written by the late Apostle James E. Talmage and published in the Improvement era tells of his experience with the evil power at the time of his baptism. Now, the incident briefly is as follows. It happened in Eddington, a suburb of Hungerford, England, in the spring of 1873. Apostle Talmage, then a boy of 11 years of age, was with Eliza, Ellen, and Jess Gilbert, who were all to be baptised in the church. But because of possible interference by persecutors of the Latter-day Saints, it was necessary that the baptisms be attended to only in the night time and kept secret. They left their home shortly before midnight and went down to the Kennet River for baptisms. Just as James E. Talmage was being lowered into the water, the little group assembled. They were vertably horror-stricken by a combined shriek, yell, scream, and howl, such as none of them have ever heard before. It seemed to be a combination of every fiendish. Now that word's been redacted, so I'm going to think it's probably demon, a demonic, something like that they could conceive of. They trembled at the awful manifestation, which had about it the sharpness and volume of a thunderclap, followed by an angry roar. Now the roar died off as a hopeless groan. The noise seemed to come from the river bridge, and Elijah started off to investigate, but he was called back. The children were trembling with fear, but they wished for the baptisms to take place. When done, returning home, they looked for signs of a struggle. None were found. No one in the neighbourhood mentioned hearing the noises, and it seemed they were heard only by the members of the baptismal party, and they felt sure that it was caused by the power of the evil one, jealous over their souls being baptised into the kingdom of God. Elijah was the son of the family, and he got employment in a machine shop in Hungerford, for which he received a good salary. He put a portion of that away each week, and that's how he succeeded in saving enough to pay his way to Utah. Now, when I looked on the map, it's actually Inkpen where this took place, and it's a village and civil parish in West Berkshire, about 3.5 miles southeast of Hungerford. Most of the land of which is cultivated with fields and woodland and, once formed part of the Savernake forest, which dates back to the Stone Age. Inkpen has boundaries with Wiltshire and Hampshire, including parts of Walbury Hill, the highest point in the southeast of England, and Inkpen Hill. The earliest records of Inkpen is in the Cotton Charter, dated between AD 931 and 939, so it's ancient. Now listen to this. It also included in that document was the will of a Saxon thane, and that means like an aristocrat, not really a king, but someone who was noble. And his name was Wulfgar, and he was the son of a Wulfgar, and that means the wolf's spear, yeah? And he was given that land. He inherited it from his great-grandfather, who was called Wulfric. Now, this was split among the heirs, and I wonder if the wolf in this case was a creature that made the hideous cry. There is an ancient barrow on Sadler's Farm, Inkpen, known for its paranormal activity. Now, the barrow is said to be either haunted or protected, or both, by a headless figure, and at least one barrow in the village is said to contain solid gold coffin that is yet to be found. And just across the fields, there's the area named Gibbet, which stands just within the parish boundary. It was only ever used once to hang a local carrier and his lover, George Brunham and Dorothy Newman, who had murdered George's wife and children by drowning them in the murderer's pool. Their unquiet spirits are still seen around the scene of their hilltop demise. Now, gibbeting, for anyone who doesn't know, is an punishment that's imposed after death. So it's the encasing of a criminal's body in an hour cage, and then it would be suspended from a tall, often wooden post. In historical times, it was known that hellhounds and shucks would frequent areas of gallows and gibbets in search of a human meal. And when you think about it, that's absolutely disturbing. I wonder how many hanging and gibbeting places there are in the UK, or how many used to exist. They were usually placed on a high point, so they could be seen from miles around by anyone travelling or living in the area. I don't have to set the scene to say it must have been a horrible sight, day or night, to see a person punished in this way, with the ravaging dogs below it and all. That energy must seep into the core of the land. And then centuries on, we dig it up, we mine it, farm it, build on it, walk on it and hike on it, not knowing what it once was. I was speaking in a recent podcast how hard it is to tap into the energy without knowing what it is. Walking into these places as humans often act like a catalyst or a battery or an energy connection that's made. What we can't see with our modern eyes are often felt within our primal bodies. Trying to deal with that growing up can be hard. Even as adults, we often try to debunk it. We explain it away. We dismiss it. It's far easier that way. But deep within us all is a grounding rod to your soul, to yourself. And we feel what the ancients felt, no matter how hard we try to run away from it. One man who's a regular listener picked up on this, and he shared some of his thoughts on this subject and how it impacted him over the years. And he also lives in a small mining village when his home became home to a demonic possession, the Neverborn. I was watching some of your videos, Deb, and I recognise and connect with a lot of what you say. It's Andrew Wainwright, one of your regulars. I know it's not easy growing up, experiencing strange things all the time. You called it the knowing, and I think you're right about that. The knowing, that's it, Deb. That's what I have. I have a name for it myself. For years, I've struggled to accept this, always looking for a rational explanation for everything. This lady that you're interviewing this week has described almost exactly what I'm experiencing, especially the electric charge. For me, it feels like a static build-up, And I know 9 out of 10 times when something strange is going to happen, I experience this, and that feeling comes just before whatever it is that's going to happen happens. It's a strange sensation. No words can really describe just how it feels. I also always get the feeling that whatever I'm seeing, I shouldn't be seeing it, that it's a mistake, that I can. It's definitely inherited, that's for sure. Granted, not always in the same way though. I've stated before, Deb, about my mum being extremely sensitive. But if you were to tell her that, she'd tell you we're talking utter bollocks. But the experiences she'd had says differently. Now, my old dear wasn't one for flights of fancy, he said, but the things she told me over the years are very hard to dismiss. My mum grew up on a farm, and she told me one night that she woke up from one reason or another, and she sat up in bed, and she said she could see, as clear as day, something stood at the bottom of the bed. She said it was what can only be described as a leprechaun, complete with curly shoes. She said it was exactly like you would see in a video or a film, and it was just as surprised to see Mum as she was to see it. She said she dove under the covers, and she felt him run up and down on the back of her. Like I said, my old dear wasn't one for storytelling, Deb. Over the years, in her lifetime, she had many strange experiences, and she could actually see things. Even then, she still doubted it all. My mum's ex-husband's house had some sort of entity residing there. I'm convinced of that. And I'm convinced that he followed my mum home after she and some friends stupidly messed around with the spirit board. My mum, though she would never admit it, she's extremely sensitive to spirit, a gift she passed on to me. But unlike her, I don't see things. I feel them, or I hear them, or I know them. Anyway, what started off as a bit of a giggle soon went completely out of control when a spirit came through called Peter. He was a farmhand that had siblings and he died of tuberculosis. Everything was going well until somebody asked it a stupid question. I can't remember what it was now, but it really pissed that ghost off as that glass they were using shot off the table and shattered against the wall. As you can imagine, that promptly ended the night. My mum told me she felt that she was being followed home, but she put it down to her just being a bit jumpy. The next morning when she woke up, she said there was a big handprint on the outside of the window. But the thing is, to get to that window, you'd have to put a ladder against the house, then use another ladder on the roof to get to that window. The window was almost on the very top of the house, and my older brother got the blame for the handprint, but it wasn't him. Things began to deteriorate. My mum's marriage fell apart. The house felt heavy all the time, and it seemed to absorb any light. It always looked dark and gloomy, and from that point on, the house only knew misery. After my mum left, many years later, I was about 15, I was visiting my sister in the village, and it's one of those places that never changes. It was a mining village, which at the time, was seeing its last days due to the pit closing. If I'm being perfectly honest, you could feel it slowly dying. It had a very sad atmosphere. Anyway, I'd left some clothes at my mum's ex-husband's house at the far end of the upstairs landing. All my prized heavy metal t-shirts. Hell would freeze over before I'd leave them, or so I thought. Anyway, I walked into the house and made my way upstairs, not thinking about anything in particular. And as I was walking across the landing, I stopped dead in my tracks, overcome with a fear and utter dread. That feeling ran so deep I froze. I had that overwhelming feeling there was something standing right behind me, a hulking thing. I felt it bearing down on me. I didn't see anything. I didn't need to. I turned and bolted down those stairs and out that door, and I never set a foot in the house again. When I felt that fear, a word screamed in my head, and that word was demon. I'm in no doubt it was a demon. The dread and fear it was emanating in my eyes couldn't come from anything alive or dead, only from the never born. In my last cases tonight, I'm only sharing the experiences, as for now, the areas are to remain secret. One is from a lady who heard a horrifying growl whilst on holiday, and the second was out walking her dog just 4 days ago. When she was out with the dog, she was confronted with a horrible creature. I will be contacting both ladies for a chat over the next week to get the details of both cases in greater detail for you. But let's have a listen to this. A guttural growling. I think it was cloaked. Hoo-ha is one of my listeners sent this in to me, and she said, my brief growly encounter happened in 2019, I think. I was still smoking at the time, and whatever I heard made a guttural growl. To anyone else, it might have appeared to be blood-curdling. But what I experienced was different. I wasn't scared. I felt mainly respectful of it, but naturally curious. It made me realise that it didn't approve of me smoking, and I gave up by the year after. It sounded like the growl of a terrier, and it gave the last bit to cement that it wasn't happy. I could sense that. I can send you the noise that it made, Deb. On hearing it, my immediate instinctive feeling was, it's got to be a dogman. This happened in the evening. I can't remember the exact time. It must have been 10, 11 p.m.ish. It was late summer, still warm. I was dressed in my unflattering dressing gown and my slobbies. I was on the caravan steps having my last fag of the day. When I heard that growl, I re-entered the caravan after that. I knew I was okay. If it wanted to kill me, it would have whisked me away there and then. But strangely, I knew I was safe. Even when I was back inside with Mum, I didn't mention it to her. But I did instantly message my best friend, asking him if badgers growled and what they sounded like. I've never seen a Bigfoot or a woodwose, but I'm convinced I've had their presence in dreams, and whilst dreaming they were shape-shifting into owls and deer. I'm not yet ready for such special encounters head-on. Often, on closing the back door at night, I wonder how many actual beings surround us on a daily basis, and I've always got an ear out for distant urbanite howling. The growl was right close to me, a few yards away, possibly only 50. I couldn't see anything, but obviously it must have been cloaked. But I searched for the sound I heard as I peered in its direction in the darkness between the unoccupied caravans. Not even the solar lights that illuminate the decking, they weren't even powerful enough to highlight any potential figure. Briefly the next day, I considered thinking maybe the noise came from the other side of the hedge, behind the neighbouring caravans. I'm pretty sure, though, it was a dogman showing me who was boss. And the reason for not being scared was mainly because my mum was nearby. And there was an old concrete lamppost that gave off an orangey glow, and that was behind me. I was standing on the concrete path to the left of the caravan. In our last case tonight, it's not the sound the witness takes note of, it's the sight of an unnameable animal. I was contacted by a local witness and investigator, David Robinson, as he wanted to share an experience he'd heard from two ladies who contacted him, as he's known in Wigan as a person who is not only looking for others, but who's seen the same humanoid creatures that he saw in Elmnut Wood. He also collects reports from other people in the area, and one of the ladies left him a voice note moments after the event. She was savvy enough to take a photograph of a very large paw print left behind by the creature she struggled to describe. Dave sent over that recording to me, and he said, Deb, two ladies want to make a report as today, whilst walking their dogs, they saw something they described as canine-like that was crouched in position, but the striking difference was the rear legs and backside were highly raised up, not like a normal canine. The recorded audio was mere seconds after the sighting took place, and at the time of the sighting, all sounds fell silent. Here's a transcript of the voice note made on the 20th of November 2024 at 3 minutes past 1 p.m. Witness. The weirdest thing just happened. I think I've walked here for at least 10 to 12 years, and I've never seen anything like what I've just seen. I don't know what it was. It was down on all four legs, the size of a really large dog. but the legs and the back end were much bigger than a domestic dog. It was brindle in colour, and it was crouching into the woods. It shot out across from me. I don't know what it was. Now, I've arranged to speak to this lady later on today, so I'll get the whole of the story. I'm going to try and sit down with Hoo-Ha next week or the week after and get her event. All of the reports that I've read tonight are on mining land, where we have a lot of ancient sites and places where people are out walking their dogs, horse riding, hiking. We don't really understand the ground beneath our feet. We see it with a modern eye, as I said before. But your genetic DNA, that will tap in to the history of the area, especially if your ancestors have walked there. You are tied to that by blood. Experiencing these growls can be absolutely terrifying, but it does raise a number of questions. Is that growl to move you on from the area? Is it done to terrify you in the hopes of feeding from that fear? Or is it done in a way so that you know it's there, but not in a negative way, if you get what I mean? It wants to make contact with you in some way. Normally around this time of year, the reports start to die off and it'll go quiet as the winter months come on. And then as spring kicks in, we start to get reports again. What we do normally at this time of year, every now and again, we'll get a report of an animal that's sick or ailing that someone's seen. Almost like it's stuck here in need of something. And that's the gut feeling I get with this account that's coming from Wigan. But that's just me. That might change once I speak to the witness, obviously. I think it's all connected to the ground. And for those regular listeners, I don't know if you're sick of hearing this, but I really do. I think when we build on it and we disturb it, we almost tear the fabric of the land. And every now and again, us humans connect with that tear. I think that's how I saw the thing at Yule. I'll never know what he was, I don't think. But I've come to terms with the fact that it's okay to not know what he was and not be put into a box about Debbie saw a Bigfoot or Debbie saw this or Debbie saw that. Debbie doesn't know what she saw. I saw an ape man that was absolutely terrifying. I don't even know why he showed himself to us. I really don't. But as I say, I've made peace with that. And what I do now is help other witnesses make peace with their event. Sometimes there just isn't an answer at the end of it, which can be incredibly frustrating. But once you wrap your head around that, it does get much easier. So as I sit here watching the snow come down, and we're tied in for the weekend, I don't think I'll be going out. So following this premiere, there'll be a live stream that'll pop up on my channel. If you're not subscribed, make sure you click and you'll get a notification for it. Pop over at the end of the premiere. As the year comes to an end now, I want to thank everybody that's listened and tuned in week after week after week. And if you've enjoyed what we do here at BBR, please consider making a donation, as me and Mark fund everything ourselves. And we know that it's a hard year and not a lot of people can do that. So if you could share on social media or share some of our posts with your friends and family, or give us a click or a like, it really helps to enhance the channel and that helps me to carry on doing the investigations. So as I end tonight, and I always say, I'll be back at the same time, the same place next week. Good night, everyone.